It is yet another day in the American empire, which means we've got bombs going off in Iran, bombs going off in New York City, all, of course, having to do with our involvement in the Middle East and with Muslim populations who are not exactly big fans of patriots for reasons that we will discuss. And we'll also discuss attitudes toward this particular conflict, the consequences of it actually in New York City, where a good friend of the show, good friend of ours, Patriot Gabe, was literally feet away from the detonation of an improvised explosive device, which was crafted to have nails and other kinds of shrapnel in it to kill Americans, which was thrown by a Muslim who shouted Allahu Akbar. You know how this stuff typically goes. And so we'll discuss that as a consequence of this continued military action in Iran. We'll discuss how Americans are viewing this, what the updates are, how this could affect the rest of the Trump administration, the rest of Donald Trump's political career, his legacy going into midterms, of course, extremely consequential for the latter half of his second administration, the latter half of his total time in the White House. The stakes could not actually be higher. Do stay tuned. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the John Doyle Show. It's been a little bit over a week now since Trump decided to intervene in Iran. Since then, American and Israeli strikes have decimated the country's military infrastructure. It's killed much of the Iranian leadership class, including, of course, the supreme leader. And in response, the Islamic Republic has fired over 500 missiles. They've launched over 2,000 drones, I think, in the first 4 days alone. And many of these attacks have been targeting U.S. bases. However, they've also launched attacks on other targets in the Gulf states, including, luxury hotels, which maybe is good. Maybe we see less from like the Arab influencer class where they, flex what it's like in these places. Already good developments. Thank you, President Trump. Also oil refineries, which maybe that's not so good. Airports, desalination plants. And that last one is actually quite important because Gulf states desperately depend on these plants to actually create potable water, which I'm told is important. So the overall number of casualties is pretty hard to determine given the totals from each side are actually different. So if you listen to the Iranians, over 650 American personnel have been killed or wounded. However, according to America, these figures are much lower, like 7 killed, 20 injured. And the same is true for Iranian casualties. They claim that, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,300 people have been killed. And then if you listen to the United States and Israel, that figure is actually over 3,000. So again, different sides of the story here. Either side is going to have an incentive to inflate the numbers that they have killed, inflict casualties, and then minimize the extent to which that has happened to them. I'll be honest here. I'm not really inclined to trust the casualty figures provided by the Iranian government because they literally cut the internet out basically the minute that Operation Epic Fury began. And so this has actually made it difficult to kind of assess the damage that the U.S. and Israel have inflicted on the Islamic Republic, which is further evidence that, Iran is kind of underreporting its losses, probably. I mean, after all, they kind of have a reputation for that kind of, bluster. Like if you scroll through the pro-Iran Twitter, like they're all saying the same thing. They say America's losing, Iran is winning. They argue that America is suppressing the truth regarding the alleged hundreds of American soldiers who have been killed. And I find that extremely hard to believe. I think that if we had hundreds of Americans being killed, I think that we would have known about it like literally the minute it happened, frankly. I think there's a very large incentive to report on that kind of stuff, which obviously would be tragic and we'd want to know about it. I'm just saying there are far greater mechanisms within American journalism to bring that kind of information to light, not because of a commitment to the truth, but because people who hate Trump, of course, want to air out all of his dirty laundry and be like, look at what Donald Trump is doing for literally no reason. Don't vote for him in the midterms. All of that, which again, we'll discuss. And this is much different from in Iran, where they have no incentive to actually go against the official government narrative. In fact, they probably only have an incentive to solidify it, to further it, which again is what you're seeing on pro-Iran Twitter. So the strikes are ongoing. It's anyone's guess how long they're going to last. If you listen to Donald Trump, he says the campaign could conclude in 4 to 5 weeks. I think he means that as a kind of rough estimate. You never know exactly what he's going to say. We do know he's never going to come out and say we are leaving on this exact date, regardless of whether the Iranian regime is intact. That would be telling the Iranian ruling class that basically all you have to do is just like keep your head down, stick it out until then. And believe it or not, it's not exactly advantageous to tell your enemy exactly what you're planning on doing. There was actually recent drama in the last 24, 36 hours precisely because of people not understanding this, where Caroline Leavitt went on a news program and refused to like answer the news lady's question when she was like, is Donald Trump going to have a draft? And then she was like, look, the president's going to keep all options on the table. So you're saying he's going to have a draft? Like, look, we could do so what you're saying, which again, they understand the game that they're playing. They want that soundbite. They want to divide MAGA. They want, to telegraph that, look, you could have to go freaking die in another war in the Middle East. Anybody who has any knowledge of what the Trump administration's trying to do here, what Iran is able to actually withstand here, how Donald Trump's advisors and actually the people that we have staffing his White House are kind of viewing this conflict, that is a little inside baseball. Sorry if I'm compromising the ability of the American military to execute, but that's just like not going to happen. And but you don't want to come out and say that, obviously. General Douglas MacArthur would not appreciate that. You don't want to come out on national news and have your spokesperson be like, no, actually, we're going to rule out this and that, because that would be like freaking bad, because then you are sort of conceding the potential unpopularity, the potential instability of the operation that you're conducting. Sorry, when you're the military, when you're launching a military operation on behalf of the United States, like, you have to do that. You have to say, we will do literally anything, actually. We will nuke you. Who fucking cares? It's all on the table. That is how this game is played. And then, of course, the panicking class, the retard right, wanted to take that and use it to get themselves all riled up about this, like, fantasy they have where they're going to have to be drafted and go die. And then they get mad at you when, you extinguish that, when you explain to them that's probably not going to happen, actually. You pour water on their fantasy and they get mad at you. They're like, what do you mean? They're like Lieutenant Dan. They have this need to go like die in a foreign country. And then when you tell them, hey, dude, don't worry, that's probably not going to happen. They're like, this is my destiny. You stole it from me. And it's like, you're not even American. So anyway, by all appearances, Operation Epic Fury is going to have far-reaching consequences for the Middle East. And, Iran was not exactly on the best of terms with some of the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, prior to the recent outbreak of hostilities. It has struck countries with which it was once friendly, of course. Qatar, one of Iran's few friends in the Gulf, was targeted by Iranian strikes. It even shot down 2 Iranian bombers, which were en route to Qatar to bomb them. The UAE, also attacked by Iran. And actually, that's pretty noteworthy if you know anything about, market and repackaging hubs for agricultural exports. But Iran's decision to attack the Gulf states is pretty puzzling because, from what I've read, Iran was hoping to essentially bully them into pressuring America to cease its offensive, and that hasn't worked out so far. Instead, reports are indicating that leaders from several Gulf states have actually privately encouraged Trump to continue bombing Iran. And still, while the Iranian missile attacks have slowed, it's likely going to be able to continue launching sort of like cheap Shahad drones at other Middle Eastern countries, for the foreseeable future, more or less. As such, there is still the possibility that the Gulf states will buckle under pressure and beg Trump to actually wrap this whole thing up. So even if the Iranian regime survives Epic Fury, it's going to be more isolated than ever. Like, as you can already see with Epic Fury, it's going to have far-reaching consequences for the Middle East. And it's also going to have far-reaching consequences for us here in America at home as well. And I'll be honest, I am far more concerned about the domestic ramifications of all of this. I highly doubt that Iran's going to beat us. I mean, I appreciate the irrational self-confidence of the Iranian Twitter people, but I just don't think that that's going to be a real problem. So, that being said, even if the Ayatollah regime is still in place by the time Epic Fury concludes, it will be severely weakened, and that is still going to trickle down to what we see in America. But there is no way that Iran comes out of this like stronger than ever. At this point, they're just trying to minimize losses. And the thing is, we are already feeling the domestic consequences from Epic Fury, even though we are like 1 week in. Like, oil prices surged to over $100 a barrel following Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which we talked about when this was first developing. Though oil prices have decreased since, I hope you were doing a little bit of Patriot shorting to secure your fortune, because those prices have decreased, hopefully stabilized, but we'll see. I think everything's going to be fine. But still, this kind of thing, could drag on quite easily. And it is worth remembering that when the price of oil increases, so too does inflation. The modern world is incredibly dependent upon oil, which is based in red pilled. But when gasoline costs more, you know what else costs more? Remember this Biden era talking point? Transporting goods. When transportation costs more, so do the goods that need to be transported. It's just like how it works. That being said, if epic fury does in fact drag on, we approach the midterms with gas, inflation, going to be in a pretty bad Patriot position, a little bit of a Patriot predicament. I mean, again, those were the Biden era concerns, which the Trump administration was able to more or less mitigate and quell. Were those to return in significant, noticeable capacity by the time midterms roll around, it's not exactly going to carry on the mandate for the Trump administration. And that's really the concern here. Again, I do not care about the Middle East. I mean those words when I say them. However, I recognize that people do not like when the American government does these things. I'm really not in love with it myself. The point is, there are obviously consequences that are going to result from these actions. That is what we are concerned about here, in my opinion. The worst case scenario is that President Trump overextends in Iran and that we really don't achieve our objectives, domestically, and that the Republicans suffer brutal losses in the midterms, which would serve as a blow to Trump's domestic agenda, obviously, and that matters quite a bit. And I think we mentioned this a few days ago, probably last week, that it is true that it's not as though we have to pick and choose between, foreign policy and domestic policy. It is true that these things can exist concurrently. However, given the nature of government, given the nature of administration, hierarchy, it's also true that there are key people in key positions who have a finite amount of bandwidth, and it is true that that bandwidth would be better spent directing and enforcing measures that should be happening domestically rather than abroad, and are these little projects which, hopefully do not develop into like full-on, prolonged, what we all grew up with kind of regime change. If this is truly 4 to 5 weeks, not in love with everything, but we can more or less, I think, walk that one off. Whereas if we really get bogged down here, it's going to be a little bit of a Patriot problem, I think. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not a black pillar. I'm not one of these people freaking out because Trump is using the U.S. military to bomb an Islamic regime that has the blood of thousands of Americans on its hands. When I was at Trump rallies in 2015 and he was saying I would bomb the shit out of them and everybody was freaking out clapping, I was like one of those people. I'm not the guy who's going to decide that, hey, me, guy who's only voted for Trump once. Hey, me, guy who logged on 5 seconds ago. MAGA is dead. We need a new thing where everyone listens to me. I'm not that guy, not a panican, very proud of not being a panican. I think that's all ridiculous. But at the same time, I'm not exactly, believe it or not, I am not exactly being a mindless cheerleader for epic fury. I'm basically giving the Trump administration the benefit of the doubt here, which I personally think is actually owed to them in instances such as this. It's really easy to trust the plan when everything's going exactly the way we want it. And we get to say, I trusted the plan. I knew it. Trust is important when things are maybe not going the way you want. That's when you actually have to say, hey, I'm pretty uncertain about this. I don't exactly know what to think. I think I will simply rely on trust, and that will kind of get me through this particular period. I agree with Paul Gottfried. He wrote a piece recently in Chronicles where he says essentially that, like, hey, the jury's still out as to whether Epic Fury is a success, and that's it. Like, we don't really know whether the offensive in Iran is going to succeed. Like, some people are opposed to it as a matter of principle. That's not really where I'm coming at it from. I think there's absolutely potential for this to have a positive outcome. That's, however, not guaranteed. And there are obviously bad outcomes that are possible as well. And there are some people who are more critical of the Iran stuff in particular than I probably am, which, again, I get. But there is a big difference between saying, Trump's doing great stuff for America. He's cracking down on anti-white discrimination, mass migration, net negative migration for the first time, like literally ever. But I don't think epic fury is maybe a good idea. That's one thing. And then you can also say, Trump is literally doing nothing good. MAGA's dead. He betrayed us. Everything sucks. Everybody needs to just vote for Democrats and then we win. Do you understand sort of the dichotomy between these two? One is perhaps maybe a bit more reasonable than the other. And I'm seeing people I once respected talk about being betrayed. Internet strangers whose content I enjoyed are betraying me. These are people who were smart, who were posting, they were good people until last week. Now all of a sudden they're acting as if, Trump's first term hasn't resulted in any wins. That's just objectively not true. And it also calls the credibility into question. It's like, okay, so you're telling me you're like the super pro-Trump guy for, say over a year, despite secretly thinking that he wasn't doing anything good. Maybe you just decided to retroactively erase all of his first term achievements to make yourself feel better over churning out over epic fury. Again, we all dealt with this in the first admin with the serious strikes. You sort of know what you're signing up for. Like, Donald Trump is not universally opposed to military action. I think it's quite easy to make the argument that this particular escalation is unprecedented. However, again, I personally have made the decision that this is an administration and this is a political cause that has earned the benefit of the doubt of patriots. However, I also understand that not everybody is going to have that kind of mentality. Not everybody is going to have that level of trust or patience. I don't even know that they should. That just happens to be my opinion. So, given that not everybody is, most unfortunately, going to be perfectly aligned with everything that I think about the world, we do have to take that into account as we approach midterms. It's already going to be an uphill battle, even regardless of the outcome of the Iran military conflict, right? Most prediction markets currently have the odds of Democrats regaining the House being something like 85-15, where it's around a 56% chance the Republicans retain the Senate. Other sites like, Race to the White House, 270 to win, they're more or less indicating a similar outcome. Keep in mind, this was already the case before Operation Epic Fury launched. Of course, that's not going to stop a lot of the retard right from claiming that the GOP lost the midterms specifically because of Zion Don doing another freaking war for Israel, which I have died for. And I'm not ruling out the possibility, of course, that Epic Fury is going to hurt the GOP as we approach the midterms. We'll get to that in a second. I'm just saying that even before this Iran campaign was launched, things were not exactly looking good for us. And this isn't something unique to like the retard right. However, like there's a tendency that people have, I think, on both sides of the aisle to chalk up electoral losses to their own pet issues, whether or not that's actually true or even accurate. Like, I mean, just consider the fact you have the retard right saying the GOP is going to lose the midterms and also 2028 for not being anti-Israel enough. But then you also have the same like hardcore Zionists in the GOP saying the GOP is going to lose fully unless Donald Trump disavows Tucker Carlson. And it's not just like the people who are, staffing the think tanks, staffing the sort of like legacy GOP media. These are like Republican voters who actually exist online who are saying this sentiment. And, I don't have a theory of mind for them necessarily, but like this is a thing that exists. Like everybody is, again, the Rorschach ink blot, just kind of taking from this whatever their cognitive biases are compelling them to take from it. And as it would turn out, exit polling from midterm and presidential elections generally reveals that voters are most concerned with issues like crime, immigration, the economy, so on. It's actually rare that the relatively like niche issues with which people are, of course, going to be occupied online, it's actually very rare that those issues are the ones that really take us down to the final count with these kinds of elections. And one of the main reasons already why it's going to be difficult to win in November is what's known as, the midterm effects. Like me, when I take Poli-Sci 101, you ever heard of that? Basically, after a president is voted into power, Americans get a little buyer's remorse, get a little grass is greener on the other side syndrome, and they just want to vote for the other party almost by instinct 2 years later. Since World War II, this has always pretty much happened. The president's party has lost an average of 26 seats in the House, 4 seats in the Senate during the midterm elections. In fact, of the 20 midterm elections held between 1946 and 2022, the president's party has lost House seats in 19 of them. So, yeah, the safe bet for all of our gambling patriots is to just kind of assume that whichever party controls the White House is going to lose the midterms. And then, of course, the sort of surrounding news cycle about that ignores the general trend, and you'll have, the underdog party claiming it as total victory and blowout, and then the incumbent party basically claiming that would not be the case. So no one even has a unified interpretation of that happening. They all want to just, square it with whatever their preconceived biases are. So what about Operation Epic Fury? When have we had operations of epic and furious proportions going into midterms? That's a perfectly valid question to ask. Generally speaking, I think wars tend to be pretty polarizing. It's not an issue like, eminent domain, like eminent domain. Nobody's really hitting the polls because of eminent domain. That doesn't really inspire the same kind of strong feelings in the average American voter, whereas obviously people feel very strongly about wars. I mean, why wouldn't they? It's a very serious thing, maybe even the most serious thing. People are getting killed, usually in some far-off land. There's the moral dimension. There's the economic dimension. There's a lot going on with war. It's fascinating. Everybody's minds are always captivated by the concept, right? Sometimes during wars, there's an upsurge in patriotism, which, of course, is going to result in a kind of public favorability toward the president, his party, his policies. This is known as the rally around the flag effect, right? One of the best examples of this phenomenon, of course, occurred during the Bush administration, because you had the 9/11 attacks, and then the approval rating for President Bush jumped from 51% on the 10th to 86% by the 15th. which is a massive 35-point increase. And eventually it actually peaked at 90%, stayed high throughout the early stages of the invasion of Afghanistan, only really started coming down after the invasion of Iraq in 2003. But remember when I said that the president's party has lost House seats in 19 of the last 20 midterm elections? Want to take a guess as to what the one outlier was? It was the 2002 midterms. It was the rally around the flag effect. It was so strong that the Republican Party under Bush gained 8 House seats and 2 Senate seats. Now, I don't want to rain on the parade. I don't want to deflate anything here, but I don't know if we can exactly count on that happening this time around. I think that Trump's approval rating, while decent, it's not quite closing in on 90%. Overall, the public isn't exactly very big on military action in Iran. You look at the RCP aggregate saying something like 49% of Americans disapprove, only 43% approve. You look at the 11 polls, it includes in the aggregate only 2 insider advantage, and the Trafalgar poll show that the public is actually supporting the strikes. And of course, most polls reveal that, Republicans support epic fury, but you don't just win elections by appealing to your most diehard supporters. Your what's that one guy's name? Holden. It's not Caulfield, like Catcher in the Rye. Bloodfield or something, just please God, let me bomb one more Middle Eastern country. That guy. That's not the guy who's always going to show up to vote for you. You do need to pick up some other people and get them to actually turn out for you. You do have to appeal to the kind of low propensity Republican voters, like the kind of guy who's maybe voted for Republicans in the past, but maybe he hasn't voted in the past few cycles or so, especially maybe not in the midterms. And this is a guy that Trump won in 24 by focusing on, right? Like those low propensity voters. But it is also true that these people are generally far less likely to even show up for midterms. Moreover, arguably more importantly, you need to win over the independents, and according to most of these polls, independents are not very big fans of epic fury. They are not as opposed to it as the Democrats, who maybe are only opposed to it because Trump is doing it, whatever. The point is the independents are still not really big fans of this. NBC did a poll, said something like 58% of independents say the U.S. should not have struck Iran, but as I mentioned earlier, epic fury is far from over, right? So this is just something that's going to continue. I'm not sure how long it's going to continue, but I think it will probably conclude during midterms. As such, how it concludes will likely affect the outcome of the midterms, even if it's just a few seats. Because on the one hand, obviously, the public does not exactly approve of this. It is likely that as it continues, there are more American casualties. This is more syndicated throughout news coverage. Public perception is going to get increasingly worse. However, it's also true that the public are goldfish, and that if this concludes in a timely enough manner, maybe we could heal a little bit of that, whatever effect it does have, prior to the midterms, which, again, I do think are very important. But let's take a look at, a few different scenarios here, right? Let's do a little thought experiment, see how this would kind of impact the midterm results. I think the first and best case scenario is one in which the Iranian regime falls and is replaced by something else. Maybe Pahlavi heads a provisional government that holds elections to determine the future of the Iranian people. Maybe it goes surprisingly smoothly. President Trump is widely credited on both sides of the aisle, not to mention internationally, as the guy who toppled the freaking evil mullahs and gave the Iranian people their freedom back. That's like good PR, right? Maybe that's not exactly what's going on, but that's good PR, which is kind of what matters in what we're discussing here. And I think this is probably the best case scenario. However, it also happens to not be the most likely scenario. I think the Iranian regime has proven to be a pretty stubborn animal, right? Pretty resilient. And I'm not counting on it really just being toppled merely through airstrikes. And I don't really want to see anything more than that. I mean, just look at the Vietnam War. We bombed the hell out of that country. We put boots on the ground. We supported the South Vietnamese. All of those efforts failed to defeat the Viet Cong, which that's a whole other conversation for another time. Then you have Israel's multi-year war against Hamas, which failed to oust them from power. Believe it or not, regime change can be pretty difficult. I know the Bush admin made it look like it was a cakewalk, okay? You had a pro in there. He had a perfect staff. He had the Avengers of Middle Eastern regime change. Fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have that exactly anymore. So this is going to be a little bit more difficult, especially, if you're not willing to actually commit to putting boots on the ground, which so far, thankfully, Trump has not done. And I think that they're actually pretty committed to not doing that. But in such a scenario, I could see the GOP doing better than it's currently projected to in the midterms. If it actually achieves this kind of unlikely but best case scenario, I think maybe not keeping the House or anything or picking up seats, but something better than maybe the trajectory that we're on presently. There's a less ideal, but maybe more likely scenario in which Trump like cucks the Iranian regime, similar to, you know, what he did with Venezuela. Like he takes out the leaders and the replacements of the leaders and so on and so forth. And, you know, hey, how about a nuclear deal? How about no enrichment? You know, you got it. Like people will kind of, I think, bend the knee in those cases. And Trump has indicated that he wants to make a deal. You know, he's open to this approach. And if I had to guess, I think this is what he's open to. I think on some level, he knows that this is like, or maybe the best case scenario, which we outlined, is a little ambitious, less achievable. I think he's more pragmatic. I think after extraditing Maduro, you know, Venezuela suddenly becoming more reasonable, I think that's kind of informing his experience in dealing with Iran. He's like, okay, well, why wouldn't that work in Iran? Like, obviously, Iran and Venezuela are different countries. At the end of the day, we discussed that, but I don't fault Trump for pushing this outcome. I think that makes sense. Then you have a scenario in which we severely damage the Iranian regime's military, their nuclear infrastructure. We decimate its leadership class. Yet we don't succeed at any form of regime change. Like in such a scenario, you know, Trump can pull us out. He can call it a win because after all, you know, he never explicitly called for regime change as an objective of Operation Epic Fury. That's not a win condition. And then Iran's leadership class can claim that it won too. You know, we are still here. We didn't lose. We didn't surrender. And then, you know, everybody gets to save face. But still, those Americans, they might kind of think to themselves, okay, what was really the point of this campaign if it didn't fundamentally change anything? I mean, you know, we were told Midnight Hammer was going to destroy the nuclear program in Iran last summer. Here we are, less than a year later. The sun's not even out again. I don't really understand what we're even doing. So I don't see this as a scenario which would wildly change midterm results. You know, the public might be a little confused. They might have less confidence in the competence of the administration. But those are kind of like, okay, I feel decently about where we're at in terms of this operation type scenarios. You also have some bad scenarios. You've got a slightly bad scenario where we just fail to topple the Iranian regime, and then also some bad stuff happens, such as like dozens, maybe hundreds of American soldiers being killed, civilian casualties, collateral damage, stuff like, you know, this Iranian school that was reportedly hit by Americans or an American missile. And I have to say reportedly because it's obviously something that Iran and Western liberals would like love to use against Trump. And so, yeah, I'm going to wait for actual confirmation before just citing this as a fact. But that's an example of the type of thing that probably would not go over so well with voters. In the worst case scenario, however, worst nightmare scenario, like break the glass, inject HRT, it's over, things are bad, kill ourselves, MAGA hat. Worst case scenario, America is dragged into a lengthy conflict that lasts through the midterms, through the latter half of Trump 2. You know, you get this scenario where you've got something that, yeah, started as a military operation. Now it's an actual war with actual boots on the ground. Gas prices are through the roof. Inflation is through the roof. Hundreds of Americans have died. There's no end in sight. Trump's to blame. The war then understandably distracts from the execution of Trump's domestic agenda. Trump's to blame. We've got deportations. We've got anti-DEI stuff. We've got economic growth. All of that now suffers. All of that is now stalled. And in such a scenario, I could actually see us losing the Senate. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen. I think the odds of, again, the worst case scenario occurring are actually pretty low. But I would be remiss were I to ignore the possibility of the worst case scenario. So if I had to guess, regardless of whether, you know, Operation Epic Fury succeeds, I think we'll be out of Iran long before midterms. My guess is we're out of Iran before June. Fortunately, the public is fickle. They have a short memory. Although, you know, Epic Fury is obviously bigger than Midnight Hammer was. But people are still a little freaked out right now. They're a little freaked out that Midnight Hammer, you know, was going on. Now we're here less than a year later. However, they also forgot about Midnight Hammer shortly after it concluded. You know, we're talking about a few weeks after it concluded. So in terms of this, the impact that it has on the American voter, their confidence in the Trump administration, their likelihood to continue to support the Republican Party insofar as they do, we will see how this plays out. As I said earlier, I'm trusting the plan, dude. I'm trusting Trump. I think he's earned that. That doesn't mean I'm afraid to say that I will be extremely not having a good time if this becomes another forever war. I may troon out. I don't know. That's always on the table. Again, Douglas MacArthur would not like us telegraphing what we are going to do or not do. I might troon out. But based on what I know about Donald Trump, based on what I know about how his politics work, based on what I know about his administration, the guys in it, we're all a little bit on the same page here. Maybe not the same sentence, maybe not even the same paragraph, but we're all on the same page, more or less, I think. So even if Epic Fury does not end in an ideal manner, frankly, I think that we're going to be all right. And you can hold me to that, as you do with everything, because I've been on the record for 7 years now, and I can count on one hand the amount of times I've been wrong about something that really mattered. I think this really matters, and I think we're going to be all right. So, hey, chin up, all right? Anyway, we'll be right back because we have to discuss the ramifications of this on the home front. Again, you have the foreign concerns, you have the domestic concerns. One of my friends was almost killed by an IED, which I did not appreciate. So we're going to bring him on the show, do a little bit of a Patriot interview. Before we do that, I have to tell you, head over to BlazeTV if you want to see more awesome content. Go to blazetv.com. You can use my code Doyle, D-O-Y-L-E, to get $20 off your membership. Continue supporting the Patriot cause. Hey, due to patriots like you, thank you. And we'll be back on the program to discuss what is going on in New York City. More leftist terrorism. A tale as old as time, nothing new under the sun. So, yeah, BRB. So over the weekend on Saturday, there was a protest held outside Gracie Mansion, where, of course, Mayor Zoran Mandani lives on Manhattan's Upper East Side. This was organized by the Pardon J6er Jake Lang as a kind of anti-Islam demonstration to stop the Islamic takeover of NYC, America broadly speaking. And the group was confronted by a large number of Antifa protesters, Antifa-aligned protesters, and of course, as these things tend to go, significant violence broke out, and two counter-protesters identified as 18-year-old Emer Balata and 19-year-old Ibram Kiyumi. I don't even want to say these names aloud. I'm afraid I'm going to summon something, like my desk will begin levitating. But these people were involved in throwing an IED at the crowd, at Americans, as, again, famously these people tend to do. And one of the assailants yelled, Allahu Akbar, before throwing the bomb. And so the FBI has since launched a terrorism investigation in collaboration with the NYPD's Joint Terrorism Task Force. But I guess the bomb didn't go off miraculously and nobody was harmed, thank God. And it was the bomb was packed with nails and bolts, shrapnel, things that could have killed dozens if properly, detonated. And of course, these are similar to ones that have been used by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, what have you. So yeah, we are at that stage where once again, Americans are having their lives put at risk, where my friends, good friends of mine are having their lives put at risk and potentially facing violence or death. And so we wanted to bring one of those guys onto the program, friend of the show. Joining us today is the TPUSA Frontlines photojournalist, close friend of the show, enjoyer of ice cream and all things social, who was actually on the scene when this whole event transpired. Gabe, how you doing, big guy?
I'm doing great. I'm so ready to have some ice cream and be social with the Doyle heads.
That's right.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, man, absolutely. We want to play this video and then react to this video, which I understand you were involved in. So, producer Blake, please play the video. Walk me, what is this scene? What am I seeing right now? Is that your video, or you were off in the background somewhere with Bo, or you took that video, or what's going on there?
So I took that video. Bo was standing right next to me. He was editing some other videos that we had captured prior in the event, because that wasn't the first instance of Antifa violence or leftist violence, Islamic violence, whatever you want to attribute it to, because there was other scenarios where basically they were beating the crap out of right-wing journalists that they discovered were Zionists. They were chasing them out saying, he's a Zionist, get out of here, ended up beating the crap out of this guy. So we were editing that footage, and out of nowhere, our head turns. I see this Muslim individual jump the fence, which he was not supposed to cross. And, a big kind of smoke comes out. Obviously, the bomb, thank God, did not detonate. But there was still smoke coming out of it, and everybody's looking around saying bomb, bomb, bomb. So, first instinct as a journalist, start recording.
Yes.
Get this footage. And
Patriot.
thank you very much to NYPD. A lot of the times they aren't necessarily the most helpful. They were extremely helpful that day. Tackled the guy instantly, went towards the bomb to try to, contain it. So thank you very much to them. But yeah, it was an insane scenario because not everybody knew that it was a nail bomb at the beginning, right? Everybody thought, oh, it's like a smoke bomb or fireworks or something like that. And you heard in the background of that video that was actually a transsexual like yelling bomb, bomb, bomb. So then you see me step backwards because I'm like, oh God, I thought there was a bomb like on his body, like literally where he was. So I stepped back and then I had to zoom in because I was like, I don't want to be right there.
Didn't that same transsexual also yell to the guy when he was apprehended something like, who's your emergency contact? Like they were already maneuvering to like get this guy out of trouble because he had just
100%.
done a little oopsie where he threw like an improvised explosive device into a crowd of patriots. Like
this happens all the time. Every time someone on their side where they perceived to be an ally of theirs, they are always trying to get them out of trouble or having them memorize this phone number, which I don't have on my person right now, but I'll definitely give to producer Blake so he can maybe pop up. But there is a phone number for these people to call. Every time we're in Minneapolis, it's the same thing. Somebody gets arrested for, punching a police officer or attacking a journalist or whatever it may be. And they're always trying to defend them, have them call a number, because then there are lawyers who will go out of their way to defend these people.
Oh yeah, dude. We've talked about this too. Like this is the history of this kind of like left-wing activism and terrorism where you have these dark money organizations. Sometimes they get funding from private sources. Sometimes it's from NGOs, but they literally exist for exactly this kind of behavior to provide legal defense and legal resources to people who are going out there trying to kill people of conservative temperament. And, I see stuff like this and I'm so tired of this kind of like contrarian, edgy, like it's not about left versus right. It's actually about this other thing I just made up in my head for engagement on social media. Like, sorry, it is actually very clearly about left versus right. Like you have in this example, an instance where a Muslim guy is throwing an IED into a crowd of patriots. A transsexual then comes to ally with him and say, hey, don't worry. What's like the number or like, what's your emergency contact? I can help you. Now, anybody with an IQ above 95 is going to look at that and be like, why is it the case that like a transsexual American finds himself, whatever, allied with this like foreigner who's trying to like kill Americans? That would be tough to square if you know anything about sort of Muslim attitudes towards transsexuality. But of course, it makes perfect sense in the contemporary political environment because these ideological lines are not being drawn so thoroughly in the sand. It is literally just everybody who is not a normal American patriot versus literally everybody else. And in fact, the only thing that can unify such a diverse leftist coalition where you have Muslims and transsexuals and foreigners and white libtards is this resentment towards normal Americans, which is why they go out there in the streets and they try to kill people. And then ones who are a little bit less, willing to go hard in the paint, if you will, just provide other means to those people so they can do the job that they otherwise want to be completed. So that's why, you mentioned at the protests, you had these guys come up to you, these Antifa people, be like, are you a freaking Zionist? Like no, but that word to them just means everybody who is not aligned with our cause. That's why any leftist protest, whether it's nominally a feminist protest, a free Palestine protest, literally no matter what, they all show up. You will have your tranny flags, your Black Lives Matter flags, your Palestinian flags. It is all one big gay club, and the Patriot is not in it.
Yeah, they do not draw lines. You're completely right. And, they never punch left. You can see a lot of these people, descendants of liberals, famous liberals who, support all of the stuff that is happening in their coalitions today. All the trans stuff, all the Palestine stuff. A lot of people would say, oh, their great grandfather would not support this. They're not real liberals. They're not real Democrats. But this is the ultimate conclusion of their party's platform.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because the most like rabid leftists are actually those people, those like old school, like hippie libtard types. And if you talk to them, which I have, they will tell you that they actually view all of this street level activism, be that the BLM riots in 2020, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, all of this, they view to basically be a continuation of their lineage. Boomers don't give a shit about their kids, but they do care about going out in the street and causing problems for normal American patriots. And they are very convinced that all of this street activism you see today is only because they pioneered it in the 1960s. And then if you ask them why that was so important to them, literally what they will tell you is they felt personally offended at the prospect of being drafted to go fight in Vietnam when there was all of this pot to smoke and all of these Woodstock whores to have sex with. They were so angry at the idea that that would be taken away from them and then they'd be cast into the jungle to fight communism. This is an actual conversation I had with one of these people, and I almost finished the job of the Viet Cong. But we want to play a video here from libtard Walter Masterson. Shows another angle of the bombing, actually, when it was thrown. So take a look.
We were born and raised in New York, and we want everyone here to stay in New York. You don't get to come from outside and then tell everyone else.
Yeah, so you've got this like limp-wristed leftist. I don't even know what you would call that guy. He reminded me of Will Stansel, actually, upon hearing his voice, where he's like, you don't get to come in here and talk. It's just like a total misconception of the history of New York, actually, of America, actually. We all know that. But now, given that state and that misconception where you have a foreigner who is now governing the city of New York, Mamdani, who, remember, as we covered, he only was elected to that office because of the foreign-born population in New York voting him there. If you polled only people who were actually native New Yorkers, who I actually quite like. I know that we want to, but I quite like New Yorkers, even, you know, with some of their more, I don't know, libtarded attitudes. A lot of them are actually extremely conservative in some ways. But anyway, now you have that guy governing the city in his actual, like, address when he's, you know, congratulating himself and celebrating his victory. He makes specific mention of the fact that now an immigrant's running New York, like, really just wants to, like, rub it in everybody's face. And so, anyway, he gave a statement on this, and he decided to say, yesterday, white supremacist Jake Lang organized a protest outside Gracie Mansion rooted in bigotry and racism. Such hate has no place in New York City. It is an affront to our city's values and the unity that defines who we are. Yeah, New York famously extremely unified. The whole thing with New York is like, hey, you know how there's boroughs? Hey, you know how like LSI, like famously extremely divided. Anyway, he said, what followed is even more disturbing. Violence at a protest is never acceptable. The attempt to use an explosive device and hurt others is not only criminal, it is reprehensible and the antithesis of who we are. I want to thank the brave men and women of the NYPD who acted quickly to keep New Yorkers safe. Our officers ran toward danger without hesitation, demonstrating once again the courage and dedication it takes to protect the city every single day. My administration is closely monitoring the situation. You keep that phrase out of your mouth. That is not yours. And I remain in close contact with our police commissioner. Yeah, okay, so literally nothing new under the sun. You know, obviously, again, this is the case where everybody understands how the game is being played. The left understands how politics works. The street-level activists behave as they do, as they have for decades. And when things get really bad, when you have to kind of address it, then you come out and say, obviously we don't support this. Duh. Okay, their rhetoric incites it. Influential people celebrate it. You put out a tweet saying, hey, don't do that. We all kind of know what's going on here. Leftists have their own unique history with improvised explosive devices. Muslims have their own unique history with improvised explosive devices, mass murder, terrorism. The left and the Muslims very united in this front. Fortunately, these people are extremely incompetent in everything they do. But there is also an extensive history in that incompetence with like failed bombing attempts like this one, you know, bombs placed under police cars, in corporate offices or courthouses that just like don't go off, left-wing radicals literally blowing themselves up while trying to assemble bombs, such as the Weather Underground's famous Townhound incident. You idiot, you big dummy. It's like a cartoon. Me when I don't want to explode, but then I explode. So, you know, again, thank God. I don't mean to make light of the situation. I just think that these people are absolutely ridiculous. And, you know, if only... I won't even say that. But, Gabe, what are your thoughts on this? Are you going to be back out there in the streets? Are you going to be getting the content, getting the journalism? Can we beat the left? Can this keep going on? What's going to happen?
Well, me and Bo will 100% be back on the ground, especially in New York, as we have discovered. There is like nightly protests outside of ICE facilities. So we will be there very soon, very soon. Walter Masterson will never win. No matter like where he is, he could become a conservative tomorrow and he will just like still lose because that guy is just so disingenuous. We were, all of us were together at the bar fight with Michael Knowles, and I don't even think they uploaded that episode because Walter Masterson was just that slow, like
oh,
he
that
was
that
it,
I
like
knew
yeah,
I,
like it was
yeah.
the same guy. Like we literally interacted with this guy like a week, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then I see him in New York, he's spouting a ton of, flowers and meadows kind of leftism, like, oh, everybody's welcome here. And then a guy literally throws a bomb over him. Yeah. And then he defended him on Twitter, by the way, which was pretty crazy. Walter Masterson also like jumped on a U-Haul that he thought Jake Lang was in after, was trying to smash the window in. There's video of this on Twitter somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Walter Masterson will never win. And I think that the left has gotten extremely aggressive in the past couple months, maybe past couple weeks, even more so. So, I'll be praying for all the people that were there. I'll be praying for anybody else that is affected by this kind of leftist violence, by this kind of Islamic violence, because that is something that is necessary to mention. This is very uniquely Islamic violence. You don't see leftists who are, these kind of cookie cutter Christian leftists throwing bombs. You don't see like leftist Jews throwing bombs. You don't see Buddhists throwing bombs. You see Islamic terrorists throwing bombs, and that's what it is. Have to call it out for it. So
yeah, and they're all complicit. I mean, like you say with this guy, if you look at how he reacts to the bomb being thrown, he reacts with fascination. He doesn't view. I mean, he understands kind of what probably just happened. And he reacts not with like, oh, let me get to safety. He understands that his life, his safety is not at risk because he's a part of the coalition. He's a friend. He understands that foe is being targeted. And so he looks on with curiosity, as I'm sure he did every other time this happened. So, yeah, we all know the game that's being played. Do not give in to despair. That is a vice. We must be hopeful because libtards are going to lose. I have it on very close personal authority. And also, these people are just completely incompetent. They suck. And, we're going to put our Patriot game face on and make America great again, I think. And, yeah, that dynamic is, like, obviously extremely important to call out because a lot of people believe that we can somehow ally with these people. Like, again, you have extreme ideological diversity in this coalition, which is only unified and held together by a hatred of normal white American patriots. And there are people who actually believe, though this is largely online, that we could pick one of those ideological nodes within that and say, hey, we can ally with you. You don't like Zionism? I don't like Zionism. What if we can be pals? Notice how those people never actually show up to those protests. I think there was one instance of like a based right-wing anti-Zionist trying to show up to a left-wing anti-Zionism protest and build a kind of coalition and realize the real enemy is the state of Israel. And they were like immediately threatened with like imminent physical violence. Like they got literally like gang stalked and mobbed. I actually felt bad for this guy. I think he had a crucifix in his hand. He was really trying to do what he believed to be the right thing, albeit, something extremely retarded. But you could see he started shaking, dude. It was actually kind of pathetic to see, like, his lip was quivering and everything. And I just saw, like, in his face, like, this very scared, retarded man who genuinely believed, because he got one-shotted by Twitter, that he could waltz in to a leftist anti-Zionist protest, which is to say a leftist protest, and build some kind of coalition when, again, the only thing holding those people together, and actually the only reason they believe themselves to be anti-Zionist in the first place is because they view Israel to be an extension of, like, white colonialism. They view it all to be the same thing. And, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you see a lot of that on the ground when you talk to, like, actual people who aren't, like, terminally online? I don't see so much of it, which makes me optimistic. But when I do see it, it makes me angry because I view it to be, like, cowardice and seeking an off-ramp precisely because of these imminent threats of physical violence. I think people really would prefer to talk their way out of this. They would really prefer to save face for themselves and say, hey, I still have my principles, but I'll ally with you. Don't kill me. I'm one of the good ones. I'll go on CNN. We can be pals. But I'm going to, retain my attitudes on this, and this. But fundamentally, I'm more allied with you than I am with Trump and MAGA. That really can't be rationalized. That really doesn't hold up to scrutiny. I think that's just like cowardice, actually. And I think that is a response directly to these kinds of instances where people are like, yeah, you know what? I actually would probably prefer to not have what's happened to so many people happen to me. But I don't want to humble myself in admitting that I'm just a coward, and so I will like rationalize how it's actually based and red-pilled and even actually of more integrity than what everybody else who's actually being targeted is doing.
Yeah, no, it's a very online thing. You're completely correct. The crowds, whenever we go, because I'm at a different protest, a different riot every single weekend. And there is never a right-winger that shows up to like ally and shake hands with the leftists just because they hate Israel, you know, for whatever reason. This trend of being extremely anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, like, that's fine. If you don't want to like support foreign aid, whatever, like who cares? But are you really going to compromise on every single other value that you hold just because you hate Israel so much? Doesn't make sense to me. I think that it's stupid. Quite frankly, I think those people might not be the best people to ally with. It's not smart, and it's extremely online. I mean, the amount of times that I have on my feed, my YouTube feed, my Instagram feed, come up videos of these people speaking. And I didn't even, like, I don't interact with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I don't interact with this type of content. Best example was yesterday. I get on the plane. I go into my YouTube downloads because I have like YouTube Premium or whatever, so I can watch videos while I'm in the air. And there was a like Zionist debate going on, and it's, you know, a very prominent anti-Zionist versus like some other guy. And I'm like, I don't even consume this content on YouTube. The content that I consume on YouTube is the John Doyle Show and Fortnite. Okay,
So true.
I am not consuming anything
palette.
else.
Yeah.
And this like was automatically downloaded into my like smart downloads. So it's not genuine. Like, it's all like manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you ask the average American like what their opinions are, they're probably just like, yeah, you know, I like maybe don't like war, but like who cares? You know, like I either dislike the president or I trust the president, you know, whatever side they stand on. Most like average Americans do not care about that stuff. So it's very telling that it's very manufactured.
Yeah, I mean, it's just totally astroturf to divide MAGA. That's the whole point. And you can agree with the reason for that in the sense that you would like to be having I guess, more syndicated conversation about Israel, about our involvement in the Middle East, about, you know, foreign aid. We can have that conversation, but you have to agree that, like, the reason this is happening now is for a particular purpose, which we are not in the driver's seat of. And so almost on the basis of that alone, I'm compelled to resist it, even though we talk about this extensively. Everybody I know talks about this extensively. We were just hanging out with the Daily Wire guys. They were talking about this extensively. And it's so funny because the only thing that, like, the real Israel-obsessed people ever say is how much you're not allowed to talk about this anywhere. And it's like you're saying, what do you mean? Everybody's talking about it everywhere. All the most popular podcasts in the world are talking about it everywhere. What do you mean we're not allowed to talk about it? Well,
yeah, if
you're not.
If you weren't allowed to talk about it, you wouldn't be seeing it online.
Yeah,
like it's just Yeah,
and the things you're actually not allowed to talk about, which is to say things that come with social costs, financial costs, legal costs, seem to actually be totally aligned with Donald Trump and his agenda. So I don't know. I'm just asking questions. I'm just doing a bit of noticing. If I'm allowed to do so. But Gabe, we'll let you go there, let you get back to consuming John Doyle content and Fortnite content. But before that, when can the people find you? Or excuse me, where can the people find you? And what do you have planned next?
So the people can find my content, my coverage.
When are they allowed to begin?
Yeah, every day. They can find me all the time. They can find the content that I shoot and the work that me and Bo do on Frontlines, TPUSA on Twitter, Instagram as well, Bo Diddle on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and then Turning Point USA as well. You know, if you guys want to keep up the Patriot cause, you know, help support Turning Point USA, and of course, subscribe to the John Doyle Show. You know, what an incredible host, guys. You guys are so lucky.
So true. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Gabe, the Patriot Victal, and that about does it for today. So be sure to go to Apple, Spotify, wherever it is that you find your podcasts. You have my permission to begin the process of finding your podcast and then leaving your review and things of that nature. We will see you back here on Wednesday, where we continue to discuss literally everything important that could conceivably be happening in the world. But in the meantime, God bless you. God bless your family. Hope you are enjoying the season. We will see you back literally before you even know it. BRB.